Facebook. I'm Erie Times-News online reporter Sarah Grabski. We are back for another live chat. We're talking today with editor Pam Parker and Times-News reporter Valerie Myers. We are going to be discussing Women in History Month, a topic that all three of us are very passionate about, and some of the coverage that we have coming up for you here, and some of the research and topics that we have been delving into here in the last 2 or 3 months. Before we get into it, I want to thank our new sponsor we picked up this week. Thank you to Gannon University for sponsoring our weekly Facebook Live chats. We really appreciate you seeing the value in these as much as we do. So we'll delve right into it. So the project this year, and we try to do one every year that kind of celebrates and focuses on Erie County's female population, is called Her Story Erie. And we kind of came about that name because we want to focus the project on history this year, which is why Valerie's here, because Valerie loves history.
Okay. Val knows it all.
Yes. So it's Her Story Erie, and of course we've been using that hashtag to promote it and to kind of mold how we're thinking about this, some of the dialogue that we're having about this. And of course, our coverage kicked off on Sunday, this past Sunday, with a piece that Val and I worked hard on that is kind of the centerpiece of the whole project, that is focusing on the 100th anniversary of the passing of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote, of course. So we both kind of knew that we had to dig our teeth in this because it was a century-long battle. At least. So we knew that there was going to be a lot to kind of look into here for the project. Of course, next year, 1920, will be the 100th anniversary of the actual ratification, so we are aware, but Congress actually passed the 19th Amendment in 1919 of, was it June? I think June.
I think it was June.
So we wanted to celebrate that, kind of pause for that moment because it's such a huge moment in our history. And of course, Valerie and I wanted to see and take a look at what that looked like in Erie County. Who were some of the suffragettes? What was it? Both of us have read national stories about picketing and parades and pageants, even different kind of radical movements, or I guess demonstrations for suffrage, and we just didn't even really know where to begin. So we were kind of uncovering some of the names of some of the suffragettes here. Thanks to the Erie County Historical Society, thanks to other organizations, we went down to the Heritage Room, the library, and looked at some of the publications there that kind of shared some of these women. Although we couldn't really find a whole lot on exactly what that looked like. So we'll let you in on our secret that we don't have an archivist or a librarian here. So it's Val and I who do a lot of the
going through the microfilms.
Yeah,
and
that's how we do a lot of our research here. So Val, talk about what you found.
Well, apparently they didn't name a lot of the local women who were involved in the suffrage movement. They did occasionally do stories talking to the leaders or talking about what was going on, but apparently there were hundreds of members in Erie. They refer at one point to a parade during the Perry-Centennial that was dedicated to the suffrage movement. There were literally hundreds of members of the local suffrage association participating. The difficult thing was trying to find their first names, because in the newspaper articles of the day it would be Mrs. L.H. Fleming. And you would look and you would look and you couldn't find anything. We were able to find first names for most of the women, even going to websites like Find a Grave and looking up the woman's husband and the woman's name and county of death and year that they died, and we were able to find first names. But at the time, you were Mrs. So-and-so, Mrs. John Smith. And these suffragettes were not spinsters with nothing else to do in their lives, as has been our perception through the years. These were largely married women, and from all ranges of life, from shop workers to very wealthy women who lived down on Millionaires Row.
And it's so interesting because And this is another story that is kind of coming here in the next week or so. I think 2 weeks. Pam probably knows. But a lot of these women who were pioneers in Erie County, fought for the right to vote, fought for a lot of other social movements in Erie, went on to become some of the first female politicians in the county, right, Val?
There was a woman named Helen Schloroff who was one of the local suffrage leaders. And in the late 20s or early 1930s, she was the first woman ever elected to county commissioner in Pennsylvania. And I believe she was elected 3 terms, became president of the State Association of County Commissioners, headed all kinds of authorities and commissions in Erie County. Very well known, very well liked. We had a number of firsts in that time period, also women being county clerks, that kind of thing.
One of the things too before we move on is I thought what was cool is I was doing a lot of the digital research for it. So I went on the Library of Congress website and I found all these really captivating photos of the parades these women would wear all white. As we kind of know, was it the State of the Union that the women, right, that all the women wore white doing that? But we found from that parade, and it was the first suffrage parade in Pennsylvania,
yes,
right?
It was. In July 1913, it was a week-long celebration of the anniversary of the Battle of Lake Erie, but women in Erie were given the right to do their own parade on one of those days. Hundreds of women locally participated. They came from Buffalo and Cleveland, suffrage chapters, and apparently they had a very good reception. Men also marched with them.
Right. And it was just interesting to see. We kind of covered and chipped away at little pieces of this. One of the women that I worked with down at the library who was kind of helping me research all of this topic, she was fascinated as well, and she said, you know what's so interesting is that all of these women were doing these monumental things, and not a lot of it was documented. That's shocking. So that's news in itself as well.
Well, and this parade was 6 years before Congress passed the 19th Amendment, and by that time, apparently from what we found, Erie women, or Erie people in general, supported women's right to vote.
Right. I don't remember. It was some sort of League of Voters. Was not the Women's League of Voters because it wasn't formed yet. That put out a map of Pennsylvania, and largely a lot of the counties were for suffrage at that point. And I think this was in 1915, right?
Crawford County also had a very early woman county commissioner. I believe she was the second woman in the state. She actually filled a term for her late husband. But Crawford County also, 10 years before before the passage of the 19th Amendment, favored women's voting rights.
And another thing that we found with the suffrage was that, we were expecting some sort of monumental celebration or something. It passed, it finally, and we just didn't find that, did we, Val?
It almost seemed to be a foregone conclusion that they didn't make a great big deal of this locally in the news coverage anyway when this happened. But then other things were going on. Troops were coming home from World War I. They were having parades. Prohibition was going to be coming into being, and they were debating how they were going to try to keep alcohol from coming across the lake. There were a lot of things going on. They were still trying to get the League of Nations going after World War I. So it just seemed to take a back seat, but it almost seemed to be a foregone conclusion and no big deal.
Right, and that to me was just almost, we were expecting this, monumental moment of, here it is.
No.
But, we get what you get. So we found the League of Women Voters then was formed shortly after that, and then of course Erie County's women went to the polls for the first time in the fall election of 1920. So in short order, that's so impressive. And it just got me to thinking too, as we're doing this research, I wrote a Good Morning column about this too today. You see these headlines, and we know that this happened, and it makes me wonder what kind of legacy we're going to leave for our kids and our grandkids. What we're doing now, and really makes me want to document it, because I guarantee that the reason that a lot of these we couldn't find a whole lot of information on this is because a lot of these women just didn't think to write down, we had a parade today, or we had a picket today. The newspaper, obviously, that's where you'll find a lot of that information, but it was just interesting to me, that's kind of the theme of the project, that we are obviously taking a look at where we've been and history and women in history and where we're going now. So Pam, talk about some of the later stories that you're working on.
Well, some of the things, and we started last week, we also have the front page stories, and then we have business stories, and or things that affect business, and then we also fill Her Times every Sunday with pretty much stories about women. And today in Showcase, we had a story about movies that are uplifting, and some things that we had decided were kind of cool even back in the silent films about women who really kind of broke the mold for what would have been occurring in those times. And you do every Sunday.
Oh,
Go ahead and talk about that, because some of those are absolutely incredible.
We have, and we thought that part of this project that would be kind of cool is to dig up or find some women in Erie County's history that we may not know about. There's a lot of women that we hit, time and time again, which, rightfully so, because they were pioneers, or we all know the names like Judy Lynch and Ida Tarbell and all these different names, but we wanted to dig up some women that you might not know about. So last Sunday,
Sunday started,
was a suffragette who went on to actually become a very well-known suffragette, Laura DeForest Gordon, who was born in Erie County, and we're doing kind of profiles on each woman. This week's, which you will find in Sunday's Her Times, is Ada Lawrence, who I know a lot of people already know her, but in 1946 she was named the first black school teacher in the Erie School District, and nevertheless she was also a woman. So her father was a teacher. Just really interesting information about her. And then we've got a few more women that we're going to profile, one each week. The one I'm working on, I was just working on, is Mary Brooks Woods, who is the area's first female doctor, which of course was in 1864.
Dr. Quinn Medicine.
So again, and that kind of ties in with what's coming in Her Times this week, because we're doing a healthcare story.
We are.
Yeah. But it's just really interesting women that you probably wouldn't know about otherwise, unless you pick up the paper this month. So what else we've got?
To step back to Laura DeForest Gordon, because
Sure.
what I found fascinating about her was, I think she was born in Northeast.
Yes.
But then her husband was very ill, and they moved to California. She became a lawyer on her own.
Uh-huh.
She was not permitted to go through classes. Wasn't that it?
She was banned from law school and then got in.
So she had to do them on her own.
Right.
And I think she was the second attorney in California.
Yeah.
And she started her own practice, which in those days would have been pretty unheard of.
Right.
I thought that was pretty amazing.
Right.
Plus, she was the family breadwinner.
Right.
At that time.
Absolutely.
She was not like you. I mean, she was so unexpected, everything that she did, and here she was from Northeast.
Yeah. And not to mention, she was the first woman to publish a newspaper, which is timely and relevant.
Also out in California. Right?
Also out in California.
Yeah, and we love that too.
You mentioned the woman breadwinner, and that was interesting too. I think that was part of it being a foregone conclusion when Pennsylvania ratified the 19th Amendment. They were saying, who's going to throw stones at these women and say, go home and do the dishes, when they're bringing home the money in many cases, because they've been working in munitions factories and they've been working during World War I.
Mm-hmm.
And many of these women were the breadwinners.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of leading into that, I have a story that I've been working on, looking at some of the census numbers of median salaries in different industries and different fields in Erie County from 2012 to 2017. And median wages, men versus women, basically, in each field, and then what the discrepancy is there, what some of the issues are we have, and of course that touches on we've gone this far, here's how far we have to go. Obviously, a gender pay gap still exists, and we have, the data there is just fascinating. We've used that for a few other stories, one that is also, so you can read that on the front page, which will be Sunday, and
that's the legal.
Right.
That's the women in legal professions.
Right.
And then on the front of our features edition, Jenny Geisler did a story similar, but obviously different, on healthcare workers. And she has some great interviews. Sylvia Ferretti's in there, some other folks that really interesting, taking a look back and taking a look forward to how different things were when they started and how different things are now, and how some of the things that were tolerated back then are certainly not tolerated now.
And just, of course, like looking at each industry and how they're made up and what they're made up of. Valerie, you've been working on an interesting story about female morticians, right?
Yeah, it used to be unheard of for a woman to be a funeral director, maybe in families where it was a generational funeral home. Obviously, Nancy Duskus has been a big name in funeral directing here. But now it's a majority of women who are coming out of the mortuary schools. And I actually saw an interesting headline in a trade magazine that you will be buried by a woman. Those are the odds. Because they're going to be the majority of the profession very soon.
And that's so interesting because, like Pam had said, this Sunday, some of the census numbers, I mean, women are dominating in healthcare, especially in Erie County, because that's a huge field. And then you think of some of the atypical fields for females, and undertakers and funeral directors is one of them.
Very few. It had been something like 3% traditionally women, I guess, in the last 50 years, and it is rapidly changing. It's a majority of women coming out of the schools. You look through the websites of some of the local funeral homes, which you did, there are a lot of women funeral directors in Erie County and Crawford County and all over the country now.
Something also that we found interesting, kind of tagging along the different fields that women are in, is, and I'm doing this story for not next week but the week after that, is how many women are in veterinarian positions, are in animal caretaker positions. For instance, like Ruth Thompson at the Anna Shelter, Nicole Baywall at the Humane Society, everyone or both of them have, higher up positions when it comes to animals. And
veterinarian is another field too, where the majority of students and graduates are women.
Exactly.
And at local veterinarians' offices, there are a lot of women vets here.
That's right, and that's going to change.
Yeah. And it's cool because these are the kind of things that we're seeing during our lifetimes, and that's what we. So the goal of this project is to document, what we might know, but we want our kids and our grandkids to know.
Some of the other things that we had talked about a little bit in terms of history were where this all started, and it was kind of Seneca Falls, New York, right now, and in the Rochester area, and Val knows history, so I just ask her because I don't even have to look
the
it up.
suffrage movement.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
It was 1850s that the convention
It was before
started?
the Civil War, and the Civil War put a crimp on it for a while because obviously the country was doing other things.
And there's a Women's Hall of Fame that is opening up there in an old textile mill. We had a story on that last week. And then there are a lot of exciting things to do up there. We talked about I think there's some museums and some other things, and things that were started by women. I think it was the Museum of Play or something like that. We had a couple stories on that in last Sunday's Erie Times-News. So those are, and you read these things, and part of me is horrified that that it took so long for us to get the vote. But the other part of it is women were doing these things and founding these things and starting things so long ago, and now those things are still coming around and they're growing and they become tourist spots. So a lot of things that you can do up there, not just go to one museum or go to Seneca Falls or to Rochester to see something, but there are vacations planned around it. Stacy Wittig, one of our writers who's been working with us for years now, she said it's like your perfect girls weekend. It's a place to take your daughters, to take your girlfriends, to take and just go hang out and sit there and realize that you're sitting in the middle of history.
And it's 3 and a half hours from Erie. I mean,
It's a day trip.
Yeah. It would be so.
Or a night trip.
Yeah, right, exactly. What are some of the other stories?
Well, we're going to get into politics, and Val, you're going to start with some of the history and some of the women who've really made a mark here. And then toward the end of the month, we're going to be talking to some of the women who have filed their petitions, and we already have a few people on our hit list, and it's going to be incredible. We were hoping all along, and I know Kathy Dahlkemper was instrumental in this, in trying to recruit women. Well, there are a lot of people who are trying to recruit women to run for specific offices, even for committee positions.
Right.
And I think we're starting to see that turn around, and I think that's going to be really fascinating in this election and in elections to come, because we have not been represented in a lot of areas in Valley. I know you know which areas we've not had in Pennsylvania.
We haven't had a Pennsylvania woman senator. There are very few U.S. congressional representatives who are or have been women. We were lucky in Erie. We had sort of a golden age with Erie Mayor Joyce Savacchio, Erie County Executive Judy Lynch,
We had a
Kathy
couple, yeah.
Dahlkemper was U.S. Congress, a similar time period, and women on city council, women in a number of positions in the county. We haven't had a lot of that since, and certainly on the state level, we've been lagging behind other states as far as representation for women.
So we're hoping that all changes around as of March 12th, right? Although they had to file before, didn't have to file their.
I'm not sure what the filing
I
deadline
think it was the 12th, wasn't
Right.
it?
I think for the actual
Right.
petition.
Right.
So yeah, so we're looking forward to doing that. That's just a couple of the things that we're going to cover, and some other industries that we're going to be covering.
Yes. And you know what? Part of this is it's painstaking. It really is, like Pam said, to see some of the median wage discrepancies. You guys will love the census data that we uncovered for the overall story. Of course, is going to be on Sunday, which kind of gives you an idea of where we are. And then, of course, we break some of the industries out field by field. And it's painful to see some of the discrepancies there, but it's also empowering, and also we were talking to Kathy Dahlkemper, who I had a great interview with this about, and she, you have to know the problem to find a solution, and it really sheds light on some of the issues as women that we face today, which of course is part of the project in general. I know that for business, we're going to be looking at some fields that we're breaking into, like entrepreneurship.
Right, entrepreneurship and technical fields, and a lot of other fields that Jim Martin will be helping us out on there. And of course, this is not just the women in the news working on this.
It's not just us three.
We just get to talk to you today. But the guys are instrumental, and of course, all the support that we got. Matt Martin, Odehow, Jim Martin, and all the Martins.
Yeah.
And and Matt Rink will be doing a couple stories for us, so it's been really exciting. We also did the story on the wrestlers last week.
Oh, yes.
That was Jeff Kirk and Mike Copper gave us all the names on that, and just exciting places that women are doing things and making a mark.
And that's one thing I wanted to say about the history of this too. It wasn't just getting the right to vote. Women were interested in changing things in society. They needed that right to vote. One of the things they had been trying to do for years was to get some kind of child labor laws that would limit the amount of time your children were allowed to work, and they had to push for the right to vote. They said it's not going to happen until we can vote this kind of legislation in. And that's obviously still an issue on why we need women representation in political office. There are family and societal issues, and not to say only women are interested in them, but they're a very powerful voice.
Which is also why it was so frustrating, because we could find these women and we knew that they were kicking butt, and we knew that they were being elected to office after the movement, so we knew they must have been very involved, and that the movement must have been very huge here, but we just couldn't find a whole lot.
There wasn't a big paper trail.
Right, there wasn't a big paper trail. So that's what we're doing with this project, is we're making the paper trail. Uh-oh. I think one of us needs to go turn on the light again. Oh, there we go.
Just have to move a little bit.
Time censored. Maybe I should have made more large gestures like that. All right. So what else? Are we wrapping up here? Do we?
I think
the lights just turned out.
Yes,
I guess
maybe that's
symbolic.
Somebody's
right.
telling us
Right.
Just stay tuned.
Yes. For all of our coverage online, if you missed the suffrage story, it's fantastic. Go erie.com/topics/her-story-erie. That's how we're branding this project. If you hear us talking about it on social media, Her Story Erie, that's our Women in History Month project. And this year's is definitely one. We've got content sprinkled throughout the month, but if you're going to pick up any papers, the Sunday papers, because they are packed full of content.
And Wednesdays, and we did Chef Lisa.
Yes, Chef Lisa was this week.
And next week we have some really, Jenny's got some really great stories lined up, so we're really working on Wednesdays and the last Thursday.
And look for, there's like a little circle emblem by every single story that's part of the project that kind of signifies that that's.
And that was designed by Steve Pushkar from here.
Yes.
And we picked up the colors that the suffragettes used in their banners and buttons
Right.
and right to vote type paraphernalia. It was actually the Mardi Gras.
The Mardi Gras colors.
Purple,
Purple
and
and
green.
Yes, so I guess it serves a dual purpose for this March. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining us. Again, you'll find this coverage all throughout the month of March. So thanks again for reading, and we'll see you later.